All right, welcome back to the Christian Constitutional Conservative. I'm here going to react to Kamala Harris is slammed for false attacks on Florida school teaching the benefits of slavery, quote unquote benefits. So let's get into this. Let's watch this video and I'll give you my thoughts as we go along. All right, so this pretty lady, she is on the left, a progressive. And the other host is Robbie, and he's more of a centrist libertarian type of that guy. And so we'll go ahead and watch this.
Over the weekend, Vice President Kamala Harris delivered remarks and criticized the new curriculum approved by the Florida Department of Education. Let's hear some of what she said.
In the state of Florida, they decided middle school students will be taught that enslaved people benefited from slavery. They insult us in an attempt to gaslight us, and we will not stand for it.
This lady, what she's doing is the elections are coming up. There's been no black shooting. So she has to gin up the support because a lot of black Americans are disillusioned with this administration. They're just done. I mean, you can look at reaction video after reaction video after reaction video, and you'll see a lot of black Americans are saying goodbye to the Democrat Party. Recently, you had a Democrat lady down in Georgia, was it, who switched parties? So there's starting to be a shift. I won't be surprised. I think Donald Trump won 6% the first time, 8% the next time. I wouldn't doubt if you have 10% the next time. I mean, there's a lot of people reacting who said, yeah, I voted for Joe Biden last time, but I think I'm going to vote for Trump this time. And it's not just black men. There's black women doing that too. So there's a shift. So that's why they're doing this thing here. Get out the vote. The election's coming up.
The new curriculum says instruction includes how slaves developed skills which, in some instances, could be applied for their personal benefit.
So I'm looking here, and this is interesting and what I like to see more of. It says examine the service, right here. Examine the service and sacrifice of African patriots during the Revolutionary Era. Crispus Attucks, Peter Salem, James Armistead Lafayette, and 1st Rhode Island Regiment. I have never heard of Peter Salem or James Armistead Lafayette. I did read about in my history book about Crispus Attucks, and I have known of the 1st Rhode Island Regiment, though I didn't learn about it in school, and I think that should be taught. I think we should know that black Americans fought for independence too. Some of them were slaves that their masters had them fight, but they ended up winning their freedom thanks to George Washington passing a declaration, or whatever it is that you would call it, Congress actually passing it, saying that if you served a certain amount of time, you would be free. And so a lot of men gained their freedom by fighting against the British. Also, the 1st Rhode Island Regiment had a lot of free blacks who fought for independence. So, you know, independence was also a black American, part of black American history too. And then, of course, you have the congressional actions regarding slavery and the attempts to end it. And some of them include the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, which prohibited slavery in the Northwest Territory, the Three-Fifths Compromise, which prohibited the South from counting people who couldn't even represent themselves from taking over Congress and making slavery last longer, maybe even adding it as an amendment to the Constitution. And then an act prohibiting the importation of slaves, 1808. So good stuff to learn about. America started off with the Northwest Ordinance of 1787 and actually talking about prohibiting the importation of slaves during the Constitutional Convention. America started by trying to address slavery and trying to end it. That's how America started. That's what makes America exceptional, is that from its founding, the founding fathers were looking for ways to end slavery because they realized that they were being hypocrites.
CNN political commentator Scott Jennings roasted Vice President Harris on her apparent, according to him, misrepresentation of this situation. Let's watch.
This is a completely made-up deal. I looked at the standards. I even looked at an analysis of the standards. in every instance where the word slavery or slave was used. I even read the statement of the African American scholars that wrote the standard.
See, it's Black Americans who wrote this. There wasn't white people. No white knights were coming in to write it. Black Americans were writing this curriculum.
It's not Ron DeSantis, but the scholars. Everybody involved in this says this is completely a fabricated issue. And yet, look how quickly Kamala Harris jumped on it. So the fact that this is her best moment, a fabricated matter, is pretty ridiculous in my opinion.
On the flip
Election
side,
time.
CNN commentator Karen Finney praised Harris's comments.
It was a stellar moment, and I think she did something that she has done often in the last couple of years, which is in a moment when something needed to be said, she got out there and said it and really channeled what people were feeling. I mean, the idea that we would literally have a conversation. I mean, I have to laugh. It's so disgusting.
No. Yeah, I have to laugh because it's so disgusting. These people are fake. They don't believe what they say. They're a joke. That's why they laugh. They're a joke. They know that this isn't a big deal. That's why they laugh. Previous video I did, I pointed that out too. They just laugh. They laugh at the stuff that's dangerous and ominous. They don't believe that. They're fake.
That there were personal benefits of any kind to slaves. That's like saying women, were happy when we couldn't vote and we couldn't have our own banking accounts. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
So one of the analyses of the standards was done by Charles Cook in National Review. He's listed the 191 times slaves, slavery, etc. appears in the standards. I'm reading through them. I don't think they would be controversial to basically anyone. It very much seems to me from reading them that the how horrible and inhumane slavery is being recommended to be taught in these very specifically in so many contexts. So I do think from looking at this that Kamala Harris is greatly exaggerating her narrative for how bad these standards are. But what was your takeaway?
Yeah, so I read through the actual curriculum. I still have it up on my computer. And I mean, they do recommend teaching the actions of Nat Turner, John Brown, Frederick Douglass, and responses to their efforts to end slavery. It's a pretty thorough curriculum, which leads me to wonder, how would a teacher teach all of this in 1 year or one semester?
Here's my problem with that. Let me ask this. How is it possible that they're able to teach the history of the United States in one semester? I mean, that's a lot. Or even better yet, how do they think they're going to teach the history of the world in just one semester or in 1 year? That's a lot. You do it all the time. You have to do it, or else you might as well give up on everything. How are we going to teach math, everything about math in just a year? Come on, give me a break. Okay? You can't. That's the answer. You can't. But you do the highlights. You do the big stuff. All right? And obviously they found a way to do it.
Are they picking parts of this which they focus on more than others? In which case, it would be concerning that there's such a large...
That's what they do in every book. They pick the parts that are most important. All right? You want to do a deep dive? Go to the library. You want to do a deep dive? Go to a bookstore. You want to do a deep dive? Go to any other place. All right? Gee whiz.
Amount of information to be taught on slavery pre-1619. Slavery in Africa, slavery in Asia, a lot of claims about the existence of slavery before European colonizers arrived there in
Well, that's
Africa.
in here. A lot of that is.
Here's the reason why progressives don't like that. Because when you give, and you can teach this in just one chapter. Here's the reason why progressives don't like that. Because if you teach about the history of slavery, even if it is briefly throughout all the world, you will come to recognize that the United States was very unique and exceptional, and that the founding fathers were talking about ending slavery, something no other country, not even Great Britain at the time, was thinking or talking about. The founding fathers were writing to each other saying, you know what, we're looking like hypocrites here. Talk about freedom and things while we hold all these people in chains and servitude. It's exceptional that when they came to form a government, most of the states were for implementing emancipation. But because South Carolina and Georgia didn't agree, they decided to hold off. It's why in 1808 they stopped the importation of slavery. It's why starting in 1777, northern colonies and then later states started abolishing slavery even before there was a United States. America is exceptional because of that. Yeah, sure, the British beat us to ending slavery, but just the concept that the founding fathers were talking about how slavery was moral wrong was something new, something different that history had not seen, if not ever, for a long, long time. I mean, I heard somewhere somebody say that the Persian Empire outlawed slavery at some point in their empire. Okay, if that's the earliest you can go to, that is thousands of years of a difference. We're talking about a couple thousand years. Slavery was a norm at the time of the founding of this country. And it was different that the men who were founding the country were starting to say, you know what, this slavery thing is a little hypocritical and morally wrong.
A lot of that is in
Instruction
here.
includes how slavery was utilized in Asian, European, and African cultures, identify Afro-Eurasian trade routes, describe the contact of European explorers with slave trading in Africa, the connections between Russian serfdom and slavery, and so on.
Right. And it might be a little bit too much of a focus on that, right?
No, what you want is just a focus on the United States and paint it as bad. No. You have to teach all this pre-U.S. history to get a focus of, oh, you know what? Slavery was very common, and the U.S. is exceptional because they freed slaves.
I think there's a complicated history there that I don't know that a high school teacher can tease through. It's the kind of curriculum that I didn't get till I was, a concentrated major in African studies and the international studies major that I had in undergrad. And it's something that has taken a lot of effort to get to be recognized, the contact of Europeans to Africa. What was Africa like before that? This idea that people were kidnapping their brothers and sisters and cousins and selling them as slaves is just not something that is backed up by anthropologists and historians.
Yeah, I don't think anybody would say that, even though sometimes it is funny to say. Because here's the thing, Black Americans consider themselves a family. All right. If you talk to them, they talk in those terms like, yeah, we're all together and we're all unified and we're all this, that, the other. I mean, they talk to each other like they're all one family. But we all know that they're not. All right. They're all different families. They're all different people. In Africa, yeah, they weren't capturing their cousins or their brothers or sisters. They were going after weaker nations, conquering them, enslaving them, and selling them to not just Europeans, but also to the Arabs. And actually, they had been doing it with the Arabs for centuries longer than they ever did with the Europeans. That's the fact. And most people know this, and most people understand this.
And it seems to me that there's a lot of focus on that in this curriculum, which is concerning. It's not that it's everything, but it's certainly there. And this contrast in the media coverage of this, the claim that it's fabricated, I think is not true. Those exact words are in the curriculum. And teachers can expand upon that. And so for folks to be talking about that in mainstream media is concerning. The one thing I will say about Kamala Harris's appearance is that she uniquely had approved talking points, seemingly before appearing in public this time.
Yeah, she had something to say that I think was wrong. It made grammatical sense. Is
unique.
An improvement for her. And I guess so. The specific thing.
It's funny that even progressives know that she's not a very good speaker.
They're up in arms about is
how she made it as a lawyer is beyond me, to be honest.
The teaching that
personal benefits.
Slaves, there were personal benefits. that some experienced during slavery that allowed them to be successful in their lives and then after slavery. I think there's certainly like a way of saying that sound, and maybe that was a clumsy phrasing for it, but I don't think, obviously, the suggestion should not be that slavery, despite being bad, was still somehow beneficial. Slavery was definitely not beneficial. I think what they were just trying to do is recognize that some enslaved people, learn to read or learn skills that actually weren't supposed to learn, but people taught them. They learned from each other. Some people went against what the slavery regime prescribed that you were supposed to do, and that it's just a historical fact. Not that it was ideal, or that we're saying it's good, or that it lessens the evil of slavery, but just the reality is that enslaved people had lives and culture and some even within the regime of slavery, economic growth and conditions and learning that did allow them to flourish even under slavery and after slavery. But that is not an excuse for slavery or something,
right.
a box to check. That's despite slavery, right?
I'll use this example. You have a young kid in the 1820s, born into slavery. He's 10, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, whatever, that age. He's been working on the plantation. His father has taught him how to pick cotton, how to plant cotton. He has learned this skill from his father. Of course, it's something that he knew from his grandfather and things, and they all learned from the first master. And they've been working at that. And then one day, the master comes to this 15, 16-year-old who's been picking cotton from a young age, and he says, "You are going to be the new apprentice." I use that term lightly, to the other black slave who's been a blacksmith this whole time. "You're going to be my new blacksmith." So he goes and he learns how to be a blacksmith. 1865 comes around. He's now 50, 40, 50 years old. He knows his craft as a blacksmith, and now he's free. Now he's able to go into the workforce either as a cotton farmer, or he can go and learn how to be a blacksmith. The point is that he learned a skill while under slavery that benefited him personally when he became free. Now, this system is not anything different than a white apprentice went through, except for the fact that the apprentice was more free to go to places, more free to do things. He knew that he was going to be free after he got done with his apprenticeship. And the same can be said with an indentured servant, whether white or black. See, an indentured servant and a apprentice, they didn't get paid either. They worked for free. They got room and board. Watch the movie Johnny Tremaine, 1950s, came out. It was done by Disney, about the beginnings of the War of Independence. The Boston Tea Party and the Lexington and Concord time period. But Johnny Tremaine is an apprentice to a silversmith. Now, granted, he is able to come and go when it's not work time. He has that liberty. He is in love with the daughter of the blacksmith that he's being apprenticed to. Something that a slave could never do. So he has those advantages, but he's still working for free. But though he's working for free, he is still learning a skill, a blacksmith skill. Now in the movie, he's not able to use it. He burns his hand and he's not able to do that trade. But most apprentices after they completed that apprenticeship, took that skill that they learned without getting paid, and were able to use it to be paid. Either they'd work for another silversmith or they became their own silversmith and started a business. It's the same condition as a slave. Yes, with more freedoms, but you're still working for no pay. It doesn't benefit you. But you learned a skill. And when you become free, or when your contract comes up, you're able to use that skill for your personal benefit. It was something that was just common. All right? Unfortunately, when you're a slave, you're never able to use that personally. But when they were freed, even before 1865, a lot of slave owners would free their slaves. And those slaves would take that skill that they learned as a farmer, as a blacksmith, as a tailor, whatnot, and use it for their personal benefit. That's just a fact of history. Slavery wasn't beneficial for them personally on a personal level. But when they were free, they were able to use the skills that they learned to do it.
Right, exactly. Yeah. I think that's how a good teacher would take this curriculum.
Despite slavery, these people thrived and achieved something and bettered themselves in their stations and were prepared to survive, to do even better without it, despite slavery, not because of it. Maybe that's the framing.
Right. And slaves developing skills.
Because they could have learned those skills had they been free. Like they could have decided, hey, I'd rather be the condition here, I guess, is freedom. That's the condition. But they did learn skills while they were slaves.
That could be used for their personal benefit.
Which they could have used that
any other time.
It's the kind of
sentence that's like, what was their personal benefit? We will teach you how to till the soil and pick the cotton, and the personal benefit to you is you won't get beaten by your master if you do these things. Like, seriously, that's what I get from that. But
because you are reading it as a white knight liberal woman. You're reading into it just like Kamala Harris is reading it into it. All right? You're not. These were black scholars, black American scholars who did it. It wasn't white knight liberal women who did it, or white knight men who did it, or whitewashing white men who did it. No, it's black Americans who created this. So obviously, you have some internal racism issues because you think that you can better explain the history of slavery than black scholars. That's what's going on here. And that is why, as George Bush said, he said that liberals have this low expectation slavery, but this is, or low expectation racism, but this is racism too, to think that you, the white knight liberal white woman, have a better understanding of how it should be taught. Yeah.
But also to frame it as this kind of large skills training. We're teaching people a trade, and slavery is just this big, charitable project to teach people skills.
That's not what
absolutely not.
Absolutely not. But I don't know. I think Kamala Harris was reading that into it because she wants to be big mad.
Forget Kamala Harris. This beautiful chick over here is doing the same thing
about this.
Yeah, I think she wanted to have a moment, and
or
using,
whoever wrote her,
like Gen Z language of like gaslighting. She really wanted it to go viral, and it's this common cringe thing that politicians do now, where they say things in a way where you just know they're trying to go viral. There's no righteous
get out the vote. Election season. Get out the vote.
Indignation in the word. They're trying to gaslight us. I'm sorry, but using pop culture words in this scenario, it doesn't land.
Gaslighting has just become like the most overused term for everything, right? Everyone's gaslighting everybody all the time.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
But I think the problem with the curriculum is simply that it can be interpreted, because it's vague, and interpreted in a direction where they can minimize what slavery was and the impact of slavery.
Right.
And I think that's the main problem with it.
But I don't think they're trying to do that.
Right. They could. It could.
I mean, there's 160 or however.
It's black Americans. I don't think they want to do that.
Many mentions of slavery and very much, again, I haven't read every single one of them yet, but gives you the impression that slavery is bad.
Hey, I want to know the link where they're able to read this, because I was looking for it the other day and I couldn't find it. So if you can share the link to that, I would love to see it.
Like, I don't think schools are actually out there teaching that that slavery is not bad. Am I wrong about that?
I don't know. I think we're going to find out. I think there's
they're
going to be
teaching
much
that
more
it's bad.
attention on this. And I think now there's going to be kids that have their cell phones in classrooms. And if a teacher's taking this curriculum in the other direction, they're going to have heard their parents talking about it on the dinner table or heard about it in the news and think.
I mean, I'm sure there in some.
Listen, if you can access these curriculums like this, like they're this accessible, I think we would have heard this a long time ago, especially with the climate, political climate like it is. This would have been addressed a long time ago. You would have been seeing it all over the place. I haven't. Not even CNN or MSNBC would have, and they would have been at the forefront because they're the crusader for that type of stuff.
Southern school districts in the past, there's been, I'm not sure so much different spin on slavery was bad, but maybe a different spin on, the Civil War was actually fought over states' rights rather than slavery. Sure, there's a whitewashing of or whatever you want to call it of how bad the Confederacy was and how structured over slavery it was and lost cause. Okay, I get all that. I know some of that went on. Evolution is true. I know. Schools aren't always teaching what good progressives want them to teach and that sort of thing. Fine, but I'm looking at what they're doing in Florida, and it seems like this stuff seems pretty normal at the K through 12 level. It seems pretty within keeping of what history is.
So here's what I will say. I'm a Christian, constitutional conservative, of course. Growing up, I was homeschooled, and I was taught from a curriculum that was Christian, a Christian perspective of U.S. history, and it was from the South, a big Southern curriculum down in Florida. And it taught the evils of slavery. Basically, what you got out of it was slavery was wrong. Now, I will say that when it came to the Confederacy, they did like to paint the Confederates as a lot better and better light than, in my opinion, being from the North, Indiana, am against. All right, I did not agree with. Let me just tell you that when it came to slavery, states' rights, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, I was a little against it. They liked to paint Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson as these great Christian men who beat their slaves and had slaves and yeah. But anyway, apart from that. So yeah, I disagree with their lost cause spin that they like putting in there. But when it came to slavery, you came away saying, yeah, slavery was wrong.
So
growing up in a northern state, in Connecticut, and then now living in the South, I feel that the way the northern states teach slavery sows division in the country because they teach it from...
What? Like from the foundation of the United States, the North was vehemently against slavery.
From the perspective of we were so benevolent and good and we wanted to stop it, but they wanted to keep the slaves. That doesn't make sense because who imported the slaves? Where were the largest slave auctions?
Let's see. There was a port in South Carolina called Charleston. There was another port in Louisiana. There was, you had Alexandria, Virginia. That was another port. Delaware imported a lot of slaves. Yeah, I mean, the ports, yeah. I mean, a lot of them, probably most of them were in the South.
New York City, right?
You're not letting Massachusetts...
Oh, that's where she's going. 1619. Oh, the 1620s. Oh, the 1630s. Then the 40s and 50s and 60s. Oh, yeah, during the 1600s when these colonies were the United States. Oh, no, wait a second. They weren't the United States. They were Great Britain colonies. Oh. Oh, yeah, that's a little different, isn't it? Huh. Interesting. That's what we're going back to? Really? Oh my.
Massachusetts Bay Colony off the hook here.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. They were also complicit. In fact, they sold it to them. Think about what happens if you're selling drugs. You are the drug dealer, and you get in trouble and you get booked, and someone who bought the weed or drugs also gets booked.
Right.
Who gets in more trouble? The one that was selling the stuff. And so the way that the North frames themselves is totally...
Here's the difference. Here's the problem with your analogy, Miss Beautiful. And she is beautiful. Here's the problem with that analogy. How many drug dealers turn and become informants against their own people? How many? El Chapo is in prison. He's not giving any information. That's why all the drug dealers, that's why there's a big, massive drug dealer problem across the border. All right? He didn't turn in his people. They're still working. That's the problem with the analogy. Not many drug dealers are turning it and saying, oh, you know what? Now I'm going to become a cop and go against them. That's why that's what these northern states did. All right, they said, you know what? Slavery is wrong. And in the 1790s, New York ended slavery. They didn't have any slave blocks anymore. And something tells me that the slave blocks probably had dwindled before they reached that point already. All right, something just tells me that probably happened. But yeah, I mean, New York was one of the first ones to outlaw slavery. And then you had Vermont in 1777 and so on and so forth.
Innocent. They were also benefiting from getting extremely cheap raw goods from the South. Their economy and their economic well-being and them getting rich depended on slavery. They were entirely complicit.
What raw goods? You have to expand on that. Raw goods, cotton, for the textile industries. This sows division because what it does is it minimizes all the other people who did not have a single hand in the slave trade who made bankers rich. For example, my ancestors, they came from Ireland in the 1740s and they worked in the fur trade. The fur trade was basically this. My ancestors worked dangerous work. You know, they could have been even killed, scalped, whatever. Dangerous work. Hauling furs from western Pennsylvania to Philadelphia. And in Philadelphia, loaded up on ships, sent to England. These merchants made money off of my ancestors. My ancestors had no connection with the slave trade. None. They went out, they worked, collected the furs, and sent them back to Philadelphia. That's all they did. Not a slave involved. That's what made the bankers rich. And there were other endeavors like that. Yeah, sure, there were some big plantations in the north too. But there were many farmers who didn't own slaves, who actually contracted indentured servants, who worked farms and shipped stuff to England. And by the time once the states became states and outlawed slavery, that's basically all that it was. Factories came up, gun factories. There were way more, in the 1800s, there were way more other industries than just the textile industry, which is why the South depended more on England for their cotton than they did the North. By the early 1800s, with the big industrial boom, the North wasn't even really thinking that much about cotton anymore. They had moved on. They're like, forget that. We have ammunition factories, we have gun factories, we have railroad factories, we have all these different factories. And yeah, we have some textile industries, and yeah, we do. There's a few textile industries that get their cotton from the South, but very few, especially by the 1800s.
So that also needs to be taught, I think, in northern schools. There's a lot of changing of the curriculum to be done, but there's some good stuff in this curriculum, and there's some stuff that I think is vague and could be taught in bad ways.
All right, we'll have more Rising right after this.
Here's the thing, another problem with what she said. From 1619 to when Vermont abolished slavery in their colony. There were no good guys anywhere in the world when it comes to slavery. There were none. Zero good guys. You can go all the way around the world at that time. Zero good guys. None. Except for maybe if you want to say, well, the people who were slaves, they were the good guys because they were the ones oppressed. Okay. Everyone else was a bad guy at that point. Slavery in Spain. Slavery in Latin America. Slavery in the US. Slavery by the British. Slavery all over Africa. Slavery in China. Slavery everywhere. There were no good guys. The first good guys, Vermont. Freed slaves, 1777. They were the first good guys. A northern state were the first good guys. Finally saying, you know what? It's time to end this moral embarrassment. That's what this beautiful blonde lady doesn't get in her head. And maybe it's because she's a blonde, you know? Just kidding. We love you, blondes. So yes, I am proud of being from the North, and we fought a war to end slavery, and my ancestor fought in the war to end slavery, and we are very proud of that fact, that we were the good guys. And Indiana always abolished slavery. There were some efforts to try to overturn that abolishment, but we stood firm. And the Hoosiers made sure that there was no slavery in Indiana. We kept to the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. Take that. So, take that as you will. Hopefully you learned something. Like, share, subscribe, leave a comment down below whether you agree or disagree. I like the comments. We'll see you later. Goodbye.